Hey friends, I'm Greg Nettle and I serve as president of Stadia Church Planting. Welcome to the Church Planting Podcast. Our vision at Stadia is for every child on the planet to have a church, and we do this by helping you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation, which is very appropriate because today's guest on the Church Planting Podcast is Carrie Williams. Carrie is the executive director of Exponential Next. She is passionate about the next generation, recognizing, developing, equipping them to be multiplying leaders. Carrie's a church planter herself. She helped start Church of 1122 in Jacksonville, Florida. Welcome, Carrie Williams, to the Church Planting Podcast. Well, I'm really excited about this episode of the Church Planting Podcast because Carrie Williams and I, our relationship is building. We've gotten to know each other through Exponential Ministries and our deep love for church multiplication. Carrie, welcome to the Church Planting Podcast.
Greg, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Hey, Carrie, give us just a little bit about your ministry background. Where did it get started?
So my ministry background, I guess you can rewind to the moment that I met Jesus in my later teen years. And immediately when I met Jesus, I thought, I want to spend the rest of my life introducing him to others. And so
Wow.
that's kind of where I started, truthfully, and then set off on the journey or the adventure of what does that mean and what does that look like? Fast forward, and I've been on several church staffs. I've helped plant 2 churches. Part of church leadership of a church here in Jacksonville, Florida, that continues to have a lot of life change and transformation called the Church of 1122. And then you fast forward to where I'm at right now, which is the executive director of Exponential Next. So my journey has a lot to do with some nonprofits along the way, and definitely a lot of church planting.
Man, so much to unpack there, Carrie. I want to go back though to what you said first. Because it was a similar journey that I had in my teen years when I really made a deep commitment to Jesus with my life. And you said, from that moment, you kind of said, I want to introduce people to Jesus. So Carrie, I guess my question is, you and I both had that similar experience. As you work with next generation young people today, are you seeing that same kind of thing? Or, is it more, it's kind of vacant today?
Hmm. I kind of see hot spots of it, but there is a lot of vacant. I think the next generation, the younger generation, really want to step into something that is larger than themselves, right? They want to contribute at a higher level. They want to make a difference and an impact in the world. But I think for some reason, the younger generation right now are not seeing themselves in the next generation. And so therefore, they're not seeing their place in church planting. There's a disconnect that is existing as far as that they have value or a role to play in that. And so, which is part of what I do in the Exponential Next world is trying to figure out how do we fill that gap and help young people be reinvigorated with calling and purpose and church planting.
So you and I had some lengthy conversations. We were involved in some lengthy conversations in a blue sky we were both recently involved in about this topic. And what are some things, like when you think about it, we're talking to church planters out there right now who are going to have young people in their churches. We're talking to church leaders who want to multiply. They're leading healthy churches like 1122 and so forth. What are some ways that are you seeing anything effective out there that could engage that next generation and help them begin to think about church planting or multiplication?
Yeah, it's nothing new under the sun. I think we all recognize and know that, but for some reason, we try to reinvent the wheel over and over again. The truth of the matter is the churches that I'm seeing that are doing this well, as far as mobilizing young people into their call, it really has, it goes back to the roots of doing simple things like apprenticeship, internships, right? So it's being intentional about some type of leadership pipeline where you're giving young people the opportunity to exercise their leadership capacity, exercise their unique skills and gifts and talents, figure out what they're good at. Where do they contribute at a high level Where are they shaped differently and formed differently than the person to the left and the right of them, where they add the biggest contribution to the kingdom right where they're at their age, whether it be a 16-year-old or a 25-year-old. But intentionally giving space and places where those young people can experience and try on hats almost. You know what I mean? Like how do we give them opportunities to exercise who they are in Christ in different places to better learn and understand how they're wired and where they can contribute at the highest level.
And not necessarily try to push them into an already formed box that we have for them. I think that actually diminishes the returns for sure. Now, Carrie, you and I have worked together at Exponential for the past couple of years, me as a board member and you as leading Exponential Next. Talk about what are you excited about with Exponential Next right now?
Hmm. I would say exactly what we just hit on with the next generation. So that's part of this conversation. And so really digging into how do we mobilize the next generation into their personal calling, which in our context is some form or fashion of church planting. And when I say church planting, I mean all kingdom expressions of church planting. And so let me
And Carrie, I've got to interrupt there because you and I, in this blue sky, we were listing the modalities of church planting,
yeah.
and I think the list now has grown to. I think we have 12 different modalities on the church planting list, which is astonishing because you think about just even just 15 years ago, 10 years ago in the United States, it was pretty much all the launch large model. And now, there's digital and phygital and virtual and micro and all of these different modalities, which I would think that would play into the strength of the next generation.
Yes, I think so. And I think I can only imagine what kind of creative things will come out of the next generation when it comes to this topic, right? And so I'm excited to just help bridge that gap. I don't know, Greg, if you saw Warren Bird's research a couple of years ago that showed us that the average church planter is now in their mid 40s. Um,
Yeah,
where
right.
20 years ago, right? The average church planters in their 20s. And so I think with all of these new kingdom expressions of church planting gives us a greater opportunity for young people to step into whatever they're wired to do to evangelize and to ultimately make disciples. And so I'm pretty passionate about that. And that goes hand in hand with doing deep dives around those new kingdom expressions. And so in the exponential next world, I get to spend my time kind of on the fringes and the edges, the outskirts of where God is moving and seeing where he's moving over and over and over again with things that could seem like one off. But ultimately, when you stand back and you look at the bigger picture, you begin to see a pattern. And those patterns help us identify that those things potentially could help shape the future of the church. For example, entrepreneurial church planting, right? So popping up all over the place is this new kind of approach, and it really, I don't know if it's new, but in my generation, it's definitely new. Where you have folks like a Scott Waller who is planting coffee shops in walking distances in heavily populated cities that are people are only mobile via walking. And inside those coffee shops, they're having church services. And so, again, entrepreneurial church planting, the coffee shop pays for itself, it pays for the building. There is no overhead for having a church there and no overhead for the staff who are pastors, but instead the employees are being compensated through the coffee shop. And so, and
It's
yeah,
a financially sustainable model. And I think about Cleveland, where I live, and here in the actual city um, region itself, it's very post-Christian here in Cleveland. And the traditional launch large model, I'm very skeptical about that working in the city, but I could see that entrepreneurial coffee shop just like crushing it here in the city. So
yeah.
I love that idea. What are some other modalities maybe that you're seeing that, the next generation leaders are that are maybe out there on the fringes right now?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned microchurch. So that is one that, or some people would call it simple church or house churches. Um, in the last 3 years, we've seen that just grow substantially, right? And so 2 years ago, There was a microchurch conference. About 200 people attended that. This year we had another one, and there were over 700 people who attended. And so,
Really?
with over 30 network of microchurches represented, and so it's growing. And it's also a very simple model that is extremely scalable. It's working in other countries. I mean, places like Africa, they are actually growing the church in greater numbers than we are in the United States of America, with this model. And so, yeah, it's very reproducible.
Yeah, I think that when we think about what we in the United States can learn from countries around the world, and for those listeners who are and are watching, from other countries, bear with me here, but we have so much to learn from other countries if you're in the United States, and not all of it's transferable. However, when we look at the places where Christianity is multiplying at its rapidest, most exponentially, if you will, it is typically in the micro church, house church multiplication model. So it's not one-offs. They're designed to rapidly multiply within a country, and and it's very effective financially, and actually is a very great way to reach a non-Christian or a post-Christian audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, another one of the kind of one-off models that I'm seeing, or kingdom expressions, that I think we're going to see a lot more of it in the next 2 to 3 years here in the United States, is what I'm calling a network church. And it's kind of a hybrid. It's the church between large Sunday gatherings, right? So the prevailing model of kind of the launch large, that has hybrid, somehow, with house churches. And so Jason Shepherd at the Church Project's a great example of this. They are a church of house churches. So they have a corporate meeting that happens on a Sunday with the entire church. And then all of those house churches also meet during the week. And sometimes it's an either or, sometimes it's a both and. People enter into kind of their faith journey in both contexts. So sometimes it's a Sunday morning, and sometimes it's in the simple house churches. And so their simple house churches are led by pastors, and so they commission pastors to lead all of those. And a lot of those folks were, if you rewind a year ago, 2 years ago, they were what we would call a lay person, right? And so
Sure.
now they are shepherding a group of people in a home. And again, it's a reproducible, scalable model, but it's not necessarily throwing away the model that is the prevailing model here in the United States of America, but it's doing both, and it's effective in both.
Well, that's one of the models I'm most excited about in the years to come, because we do have lots and lots of really healthy, larger churches in the United States. And let's just define larger church. These days, I would say by 200 and up, right? It could be a church of 400, 600. So I think a whole lot of church leaders out there, all the way up to the giga churches and so forth. But the idea that I love is, my wife and I are working with a micro church here in Cleveland, Ohio, and still, lots of our members of the micro church have young children. And so how do you provide? Well, if you're attached to a larger, more traditional model of launched church, they can still provide the children's ministries at that local church and be part of the youth programs and so forth, that the micro church can't necessarily, or may find it more challenging to provide. So I love that hybrid model.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And we've kind of coined it the network church model, because it technically is a network of churches within a church. And
I
so,
love that.
yeah. So,
Jerry, you and I too at the Blue Sky, talk about this a little bit if you're seeing this, but I don't remember if it was Courtney Wright from Atlanta who brought this up at the Blue Sky or not, but the idea of a church being completely just multimodal and intentionally kind of starting that way or moving in that direction. Are you seeing that out there in any places?
I think there are a few. There aren't many right now. But there are churches who are trying different expressions, right? And so, Josh, who was with us at the Blue Sky event, right? So they
Yeah.
are trying some things in the metaverse, right? And so you've got You've got guys like Jason Poling, who has an in-person church service, and then he literally an hour later puts on his VR goggles and then is pastoring in the metaverse. And
Ah,
so, which the Today Show did a whole thing on him. Super fun.
well, nice.
He was one of our next venture projects. We do this thing called Shark Tank where we bring in all these
Yeah.
innovative projects, and he was one of those. And so, so we're learning from folks like Jason.
Hey, Carrie, talk about unpack Shark Tank a little bit.
Yeah. So every year we look for 10 to 15 projects. We call them projects, but they're new innovative ministries that we think will help shape the future of the church. And so they go through an application process where we narrow down to those 10 to 15, and those 10 to 15 are invited to what we call Shark Tank. So they do a 7-minute pitch in front of a group of next venture partners who invest into a kingdom capital venture fund, and we vote on who should get what kind of grants. And so all 10 to 15 of our projects end up with some type of grant, but we do have a first, a second, a third place winner every year. And then we feature them in things like a podcast series. We do articles. We invite them to lead workshops and things like that at exponential conferences. And then also Outreach Magazine will feature them in different articles. We've had several
Wow.
on the front cover of Outreach. And so it's just our way of trying to keep a pulse on where's God moving in different spaces and places. And so, so we're always looking for new projects, new innovative projects that are anywhere from like 6 months old to 3 years old. Now, sometimes we go beyond the 3-year marker because innovation, sometimes takes a long time
Takes time.
to kick off, right? I mean, like if you've ever started anything, it takes a hot minute. So, but our number one goal is to pour fuel on what they're doing. We want to pour gas.
Okay, so
Right.
so Carrie, look, hey, I'm an innovative entrepreneurial leader out there, and I'm listening to this podcast. I'm going, wow, I'd like to try out for that, or like, how do I get on the show? How do I get to be?
So
Yeah,
right now, there's one of two ways that people can do that. Number one is if you attend Exponential Global in March, we open it up to all attenders to take one of 16 valuable spots to come and pitch in a little private room. So all the attenders don't know where we're at or how to find us. So you can't sneak in and watch any of these presentations. It's a closed room, and we offer 16 spots for folks to come in. They apply and they come in and they do their pitch. From there, they get an invite to apply for Shark Tank. The other way that you can get involved right now is by referral only. So we have a network of folks that we just extend the opportunity. Like for you, Greg, you got my
yep,
email that, hey, do you have any
yes,
innovative projects you'd like to just refer any lead
absolutely,
that are
right.
doing amazing things? And so we take referrals. We are considering in the next couple of years opening it up, but to a little broader, so that anyone can apply at any time. But we want to make sure that we're ready for that. So we're not quite there yet.
Well, I love that you're doing it, Carrie. You're doing a lot of work with the next generation, and millennials and younger have gotten somewhat of a bad rap. I mean, they don't work as hard, they don't have the same drive, they don't love Jesus as much, all that stuff. And in my personal experience has been, that's not true. I have found younger people that are passionate. When they find their passion, they are ready to go for it and harder working than anybody I've ever seen. What are you seeing in those generations?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Greg. I think first, I just want to challenge us that when we start judging the younger people, uh,
Yeah.
remember that we're the ones who raised them. It was our generations who raised those people. And so, we have a role to play in this and a responsibility to take along the way. So I will point that out. But yeah, I'm seeing generations, and I'll say generations because it's not just one generation. It's multiple younger generations who are ready to dig their teeth in and kind of wrap their hands around something that is larger than themselves. And I think that when they identify that and they're given permission, then they're willing to put in the hard work and roll up their sleeves. But I think we also have a generation who needs to be reminded that they can. Um, that speaking life over them, reminding them of who they are to their own generation, I think is of utmost value and importance, right? Um, yeah, all of the folks that I interact with that are in younger generations, they're committed. They wake up early. They usually stay up really late, which I don't highly recommend, but they do it anyway. Um, and they're really passionate. I think the difference is that we are now that generation who we used to say the same things about, right? So when we were
Yeah.
younger, they think
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, they're stuck in their tradition and they don't invite young people to the table and they won't really listen to new ideas. And so we have a choice. I think putting the ownership on us, we have a choice to invite them to the table, to be open to their ideas, give them space to try things in a safe environment, right? Like give them space to make dangerous decisions, to take some risks, to learn along the way. I mean, that's what all of us experienced, right? And so I don't find a generation that doesn't want to engage. I find a generation who just needs permission to do it.
You just spoke so many gems and words of life right there. I hope all of our younger listeners were really, kind of grasping onto that. Don't judge, because we're the ones who actually raised them. But I think back to the work ethic idea, Carrie, and my dad was a farmer, and not surprising in an agrarian culture, and had a monster work ethic. But honestly, I think when I was young, my dad would have said, why are you so lazy?" The reality is I'm actually a very hard worker. I had to go to counseling to talk to a therapist to deal with my type A driven personality, right? Which a lot of us did. But my work is a very different work from what my father did growing up on a farm. Now, I have a 16-year-old son, and I could be tempted to say the same thing that my father would have said. But my son is working hard. It's in a very different way from what I did when I was growing up. And I think we have to understand that generationally, there are different expressions and really different, very, very different skill sets when we think about the future of technology.
Mhm.
Carrie, now I absolutely, you mentioned Exponential Global, which takes place in Orlando next March, and Stadia will be there as we always are. And it'll be this amazing blowout and very encouraging and meaningful, life transforming time. It's almost sold out though, right? I mean, it's getting close.
Yeah, I want to say we might have like 300 tickets left as of
Okay, so if you're listening, get your tickets, okay? First of
that.
all, because we want to see you there. But we've had these conversations. I believe completely that the best years of Exponential and most impactful years of Exponential are in front of us. And that's largely because of a lot of the work that you're doing, looking at next generation trends. What are you seeing at Exponential that you're kind of, hey, I'm so excited about this?
Hmm. I'm excited about reaching our mission. I think for the first time in like the history of Exponential, or since I've been there, that I really think, Greg, in our lifetime, we will reach our mission. Our mission is that 16% of churches in the United States of America would be reproducing or multiplying churches. And so churches who plant churches, that plant churches.
Yes.
16% is the tipping point, right? So if we reach the tipping point, ultimately more and more leaders will choose to multiply in the future. That's the only way that we're going to keep up with the demand as far as space to make disciples in our country. Right now we're currently closing more churches than we're starting. And so if we
Right.
can reach 16%, we will continue to see Jesus made known in the United States of America. And what I'm most excited about is that in the exponential world, we are getting extremely intentional about how we reach that 16% mission. And I think it's
I,
really
I, I love it, Carrie. I'm a raving fan. Carrie, as we kind of wrap up here, what are you watching, listening to, reading right now? Any one of those that you'd go, this is just kind of fun, or this is meaningful to me?
What am I watching or listening? I mean, truthfully, I'm listening to the Exponential Next podcast because we highlight all of our focus areas. So every year we choose different focus areas to do deep dives into, and it is the most informative conversations that I've been engaging in. And so I highly recommend it, not just because we're producing it by any means. We bring in some of the most leading voices in these areas, leading practitioners, not just thought leaders. Our content directors, who are folks that we hire from other organizations who are experts in their areas, are having these conversations. And so we get to learn. As Exponential, we are learning alongside everyone else who's listening. And so,
okay, so tell us, what's the name of the podcast again?
Exponential Next podcast.
Okay, Exponential Next podcast. Everyone go jump on that, download it, and make sure you like it so that we can get the word out and get to that 16% multiplication. Carrie Williams, thank you so much for being on the Church Planting Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Greg. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to the Church Planting Podcast, part of the Stadia Podcast Network. To find more great episodes and to see how Stadia can help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation, be sure to check out stadia.org/podcasts.